Welcome to Madang. Today's special guest is Brian McLaren on his latest book, Do I Stay Christian? He shares about white Christianity, parenting, heresy, Jesus and an oppressed brown Palestinian Jew, Roman Empire, the Doctrine of Discovery, and so much more. Please stay tuned. Please join over 3,000 people on Homebrewed Christianity's online class, Do I Stay Christian? This is an online pop-up learning community with Brian McLaren and Trip Fuller. This is a 4-week exploration of staying Christian, a guide for the doubters, the disappointed, and the disillusioned. Please follow Homebrewed Christianity as Dr. Fuller has other amazing weekly podcasts. Join him as he celebrates 14 amazing years of podcasting and has become the most listened to theological podcast in the world. Rooted in the Christian Quaker tradition of contemplation that inspires action, ESR prepares theologically diverse students for a pluralistic world. ESR offers many graduate programs such as Master of Divinity, Master of Arts in Peace and Social Transformation, Master of Arts in Religion, Master of Arts in Theopoetics and Writing. ESR also offers postgraduate certificates such as Bivocational Ministry Certificate, Entrepreneurial Ministry Certificate, and Writing as Ministry Certificate. Furthermore, ESR offers scholarship funds that do not have to be paid back, such as the Cooper Scholar Program and Starrett Scholar Program. Please check ESR website at www.esr.earlham.edu for all degrees, certificates, and scholarships. Join me at the Writing for Your Life online conference, How to Write Dangerously, September 12 through 16, along with an outstanding group of speakers, including John Palovitz, Lisa Sharon Harper, Brian McLaren, Frank Thomas, Robin Henderson Espinoza, Amy Julia Becker, and many more. Go to writingforyourlife.com to learn more.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com. This is Madang, an outdoor living room for guests to share their experiences and their work. I invite you to come in and stay for a while.
Welcome to Madang. Today I have a very interesting and special guest, Brian McLaren. He's a former college English teacher and was a pastor for 24 years. Now he's an author, activist, public theologian, and frequent guest lecturer for gatherings in the U.S. and internationally. His work has been covered in Time Magazine, Newsweek, USA Today, the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and many other media outlets. Brian has written over 15 books, including Faith After Doubt, Do I Stay Christian, and A New Kind of Christian. He is a faculty member of the Living School at the Center for Action and Contemplation. Today, I'm so grateful that he joins us on Madang Podcast to discuss his latest book, Do I Stay Christian? His book has been endorsed by many, many big name figures, and one of them is Father Richard Rohr, who writes, Brian's new book on remaining Christian knocks it out of the ballpark in terms of framing and naming the questions. I cannot stop reading it. Thank you, Brian. And Reverend Dr. Amy Butler says, any thoughtful Christian has been asking the questions McLaren tackles here, but many of us are afraid to voice them out loud. In Do I Stay Christian, we're gifted a gentle guide who opens ideas and voices the questions we cannot, naming our frustration, fear, and hesitant hope. So Brian, thank you so much for joining me today. I know you're so busy, so thank you so much.
Well, I have to say, I'm so happy to be with you, and I'm a fan of your podcast and of your work. So it's an honor to be with you. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. That means so much to me. I'm going to put that on rewind and listen to it all day long.
Well, it's very, very true. It's very, very true.
Thank you. And it's great to have you on finally. It takes me so long. Other podcast hosts, they do like 3 a week or something. I just do like 1 a month and I can barely survive doing 1 a month. So I'm so glad to get you on because you are such like a big name and you have impacted Christianity and my life in so many ways. So thank you so much for coming on. And before we get into this fabulous book, Do I Stay Christian? I wanted to ask you about your work at the Center for Action and Contemplation, because I've always been interested in it.
Yes.
And then, you know how Father Rohr has a daily meditation thing, and he tweeted at me, and one meditation was on my book, Homebrew Christianity's Guide to the Holy Spirit. And I thought, I didn't even know he knew I even existed. So that just blew me out of I was just gone. And I just told everybody over and over again that he read my book. And I'm hoping to have him on one day too. So tell me your work about that before we get into your book.
Sure. Well, Richard and I have been friends for a little more than 20 years, 23
Wow.
years, something like that.
Wow.
And originally, he and I were invited to speak at a gathering, and the organizer of the gathering said, "I've set aside a lunch. I want you two to meet each other." I had read one of his books, but I didn't know him. And he being in the Catholic world, I was in the Protestant world. Thank God this is breaking down, but people tend to run in their lanes, and you don't get to cross-pollinate. So he and I had lunch and hit it off. And then over the next several years, we would get invited to speak at the same events and our paths would cross. And we'd almost always manage to get a meal together. And so a good friendship developed. And Richard, he's 79, and he's had a lot of health problems and in recent years. And the organization has been smart to be thinking, they can't keep all the weight can't be on his shoulders. So a few years ago, they contacted me and asked, would I be able to be involved and sort of help lift maybe some of Richard's load for teaching. So it's been a great experience. We've got a beautiful faculty, Jim Finley, who's just an amazing human being, and Dr. Barbara Holmes, just phenomenal educator and intellect, and yeah, so it's been a great experience, and I'm not at all surprised that your book would be on the CAC's radar, Grace, and there are many reasons for it. Number one, you being a brilliant thinker and educator.
You're
and all
too
the rest.
nice.
But seriously, one of the things that is happening in the world of contemplation is that East and West are meeting.
Yeah.
And your work, for example, I loved in the book you mentioned a minute ago, talking about the connection of chi and the Holy Spirit. I just think there's so much that's so rich and so important there that's having a big influence on me and is, I think, going to be even more important in the coming years. So.
Oh, Brian, I should have had you on earlier. If you're going to say all these nice things about me, I should have had you on earlier. I needed to hear that. Thank you so much for reading my book too, but please tell Father Richard Rohr that I am just blown away, and I'm just so excited that he even knew who I was and even read one of my books. I hope that, I hope to get involved. My students love his work too, and they're always asking, can we always study him, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just thrilled, and I'm so excited that you're teaching there, and maybe if you need more people, I would love to get involved. Yes, so put me in the back burner somewhere if you need somebody.
I would love that too. That would be a great thing.
One of my books long time ago was called Contemplations from the Heart. So I just love his center. And I remember him saying the action part is so important. That's why he had to put that in the name. So Center for Action and Contemplation, which is great. And I'm so glad you're doing that, as well as all these other things that you're doing. Amazing. You get to speak with him on different occasions. I just hear you speak on different occasions. So it's great that you're here. And I just, You know what? I really loved your book because you were able to say, just like Amy Butler, ask these questions and say the things that many of us want to say. And me as an academic am so afraid to say and ask and talk about. So I'm so glad that you were able to do this. And you begin the book. I was kind of, I had to laugh all day long when I read the sentence. Nobody is born a religious jerk. It takes a religion to help someone become that way. I think you need a huge bumper sticker and a banner, because I think that's like one of the greatest quotes of all time. Nobody is born a religious jerk. It takes a religion to help someone become that way. So tell us listeners what you really were thinking when you wrote that, because I think you need a huge poster for this.
Well, and I don't remember exactly, but I think the next sentence is something like, and I know this from personal experience or something. Yeah, in fact, writing that sentence really came from an experience in parenting. My children are all now between the ages of 35 and 41. And I'm sure, just like you, Grace, being a parent is the most important thing I've ever done. I was not casual about parenting. I put my whole heart into it, as I do still, and as my wife does. And but you get older. It's funny, when we had very young kids, we had a friend whose kids were a little bit older, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Brian, do your best for your kids. Do your very, very best. And then when they become adults, apologize and tell them they deserve better." So we always sort of kept that in the back of our minds. But it was interesting to learn how the religious framework that I raised my kids in, that I think was a big improvement over the religious framework I was raised in, still had its harm. And over the years, each of my kids has talked to me about some of that harm. And I realized, who knows how your life could have been, but I realized that there were elements of my religious upbringing that made me a worse parent than I think I would have been otherwise. So of course, those are such complicated hypotheticals, but we sure see it in the world today, and politically, ecologically. I mean, look, any person with an open mind would take climate change seriously. Any person who pays attention to facts, unless religion and politics polluted their brains to make them doubt what's obvious. Any sensible human being who would meet people of different races and religions would lose their sense of white supremacy or whatever kind of supremacy, Christian supremacy, whatever, nationalism. You meet people and you realize we're all human beings, but our religions, and often with our politics, successfully convince us that we're superior, whatever the we is. So yeah, that's part of what I mean by that.
Yeah. And I still love it. I'm going to keep reading it, and maybe I'll print it up for myself, because I think, and you do write in your book about how you wrote a letter to one of your adult children. And I thought, my kids are getting older too. And I remember one of them said, two are in their 20s, and one of them said that, they're an adult now. And I said, no, in the Korean tradition, even if you're 60 and I'm still alive, I'm still your parent. And I can still tell you what to do. But anyway, we have all these different traditions that we belong to. But I think when they were born, you have all these ideals. This is what I'm going to do. And I actually wrote a journal for each of the kids until they were maybe like 6 months or 1 year. And then you get so busy, you can't keep up with it. I wish I continued, but I think part of that, I think you included a letter of forgiveness. I think, you set such a good example, because I think all of us need to do that. So that might be another thing I might have to do and put on my to-do list, because, and when I read your book and your life, I feel like we kind of lived parallel lives, but, I'm behind you, but we still did, because I grew up very conservative evangelical Christianity, and damaged me, and I tried to raise my kids differently, but I'm sure I damaged them along the way too, and continue to do so. So I'm just grateful that you can put that in your book and share with us. So, us parents need to be reminded that we do so many dreadful things to our kids. So thank you for adding that. You also talk about early in Christian history, heretic was a neutral word,
Mm.
roughly equivalent to nonconformist. But by the middle of the second century, the word changed to an epithet. So can you share us more? Because whenever I teach theology, we always go into heresy and orthodoxy. Yes. So I just love this topic so much. And I'm so glad you touched on it. So say a bit more.
Sure, Grace. And I would imagine you know way more about this than I do, but just in the last few years, there has been a lot of new research about the earliest forms of Christianity. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say there was no such thing as Christianity. There were many Christianities. There were many very, very different takes. And we even see it if you just think about the difference between the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of John. People who were formed by one or the other of those documents would have they're just very, very different understandings of Jesus. So and you even feel it in the letters of the New Testament. And so diversity was there was so much diversity. And I suppose all of the dynamics of this are complex, and the story's been told in a lot of different ways. But when power became centralized, and that centralized power was involved deals that were made between bishops of the church and the emperor of Rome. It created a shift in Christian ethos where now conformity was not only a theological virtue, it was a political necessity. And the consequences of not conforming could be banishment, imprisonment, and centuries later, torture and death. So and what that meant is that the Christian faith that was flowering ends up being re-centralized, and of course under people who have made deals with the emperor of the most powerful and arguably, institutionalized violence at a pretty high scale, that have all kinds of cultural supremacy, political supremacy, a whole theology of domination. Man, deep, deep effects. And when you look through Christian history, the irony is for Protestants like you and me, we celebrate Protestants having the courage to be different. Not so much after we're in control of our own little areas. Now being different is a heresy again.
Yeah. So thank you so much for touching on that. In your book, you talk about Jesus a lot. So, you do mention, which I was so glad about because I'm kind of working on this topic about Jesus wasn't oppressed. This is what you write. Jesus was an oppressed, brown, Palestinian Jew living in a Middle Eastern nation that was occupied by a European empire centered in Rome. And I'm so glad, I'm always thankful when a white man reminds the rest of us, because we people of color have been saying it over and over again that Jesus was not white.
Yes.
And so I'm so glad that you mentioned it. So why in the world do we keep talking about Jesus as a white savior?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that when the two centers of Christianity, one was in Constantinople and one was in Rome, and then in a sense, both of them represented kind of Eurocentric and white dominant forms of Christianity. In the earliest decades and centuries of the church, one of the main centers of Christianity was in Egypt, and in many ways the spiritual center. There was a spiritual center in North Africa. So Christianity could have been an African religion if things had gone differently. Yeah. At the very least, it was a Middle Eastern religion, not a European religion. But for all of the complex reasons, dynamics of history, Europeans ended up of course, they never had a monopoly on Christianity. There was a vibrant Ethiopian church, and I was just with a friend the other day who's of Indian descent, and the Maratama Church, was her heritage, and so there was a church in India that goes way, way, way back, and the Syrian churches and so on. They were different. They had their own identity. But this domination by white Europeans then gets weaponized in the 1400s, was something a lot of people now are learning about. And if folks haven't, I hope they'll Google the term Doctrine of Discovery. And this created this militaristic, colonizing, supremacist fusion of white European identity and Christian identity that has, as I write in the book, has had an incalculable death toll and life toll, meaning just draining and degrading the lives of, I mean, literally, hundreds of millions of people.
It's devastating. So I'm so glad you spent some time on that Doctrine of Discovery, and I'll be using that for my future research work that I'm doing. I think you laid it out so clearly, the devastation that this doctrine had on Native Americans and First Nations too in Canada. So I just am so grateful that you laid it out. And if people are interested, they can, even just for that piece, I think it's worthwhile diving into your book, because you laid out so clearly, and then you tie it in with white Christianity, or Christianity being associated with white supremacy. And I just love it when white people write about this, because then people will take it more seriously. So I just thank you for bringing that together and tying it in. Did you want to say more about white supremacy? Because for me, I thought that was a key point in your book. And your title is, Do I Stay Christian? My whole life, that hasn't been my question. My question was, do I stay in the church? But I liked it the way you wrote, do I stay a Christian? Because that's even a bigger question. So if you wanted to say more about the white supremacy and Christianity.
So, I never like to mention people's names in a negative light, but I'm going to almost do that right now.
Okay, go ahead.
But just today, as we're having this conversation, the Southern Baptists are having their big gathering, and they were on the verge of kicking Rick Warren out of the denomination. And I know Rick. I would consider us having, a friendly relationship. He's been always treated me very kindly, and I have a lot of respect for him. But it was interesting today reading a quote where he talked about how the times are becoming so dark, evil, and secular. And I just, I wanted to get on the phone and say, Rick, why do you talk that way? What are you referring to? Do you think times were better before 1860 when people were enslaved? I mean, they were sure more religious, but they were also more white supremacist, and they endorsed slavery and hatred of Native peoples. And as you know, for decades and decades after that, oppressive toward Asian immigrants. And I just think, why does this kind of garbage keep being said by these conservative white Christians? I would have to say that for most people, their lives are so much better that now that the world is more secular. So it breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart that form of Christianity is so blind to its own history. It is dangerous. And this is why, Grace, I felt I had to write about this, even though I think I wrote about it a lot more than a lot of readers would like to hear it. Because here's my fear. The worst crimes that the Christian religion has ever committed could be in our future, or worse crimes could be in our future than any of the horror. And that's saying a lot. And we see it in the kinds of leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention who perpetuate ignorance and who are fueling, I live in Florida. I often say Florida exists so that all other states in the United States could say, well, things could be worse. But our governor is just on this crusade to make sure that poor, fragile white ears will never hear anything that will make them feel bad about our history. Oh my gosh, it's
It
staggering.
is so sad. And what you're describing right now and in your book, that's why it's so important, because people of color can write about the atrocities that the Doctrine of Discovery and white Christianity, white supremacist Christianity have done to people of color. And people will just say you're complaining.
Mm.
But it's so important for someone like you and of your stature to write about it. That's why I just loved it. And I just kept turning the pages. What else is he going to criticize? And please say more. I'm like, please, Brian,
Well,
get
hey,
more into it.
well,
So that's
Grace,
why I really loved your book. I think it's so important that both people of color and white people read it, because I think white Christians and Christians in general, we have very bad memory. We forget about it, and we need to be reminded of it. And I think it should be preached, it should be studied, it should be in Bible studies, that it is also, it's not that far from our history. It's kind of very recent. So I think, your book was so good at pointing out some of these big problems that Christians have caused throughout history. You began from the beginning all the way to the present. So you did a very thorough job. So I was really grateful for that.
Well, Grace, let me just say, as a white Christian, I made it through over 50 years of my life never hearing about the Doctrine of Discovery, never hearing about, this incredible history, incredibly horrific history.
Mm-hmm.
So white people, we've created this brainwashing and this suppression. It's as if you could imagine Germany succeeding and never learning, like covering up the history of what happened in World War II.
Yeah.
And so the only reason I know about this is because of people of color who were saying it. And like the only way a white guy heard about it was because people of color told me. I think, for example, of Mark Charles, Navajo leader who,
ran for president.
He ran for president, and he and Sung Chan Ra did such a great job in their book, talking about the Doctrine of Discovery, called Unsettling Truths. But also, I just think it was Howard Thurman and James Cone and John Sobrino, and it was all of, and Naima Teague, and all of these people of color who introduced this white kid to liberation theology that helped me understand that in the Bible, when you read the word salvation, the real meaning is liberation. Like why we use the word salvation instead of liberation, to me in itself is propaganda.
Yeah.
So,
I think you got it right on there. So thank you. And I'm so glad that you're reading so many people of color. So that's really good for me as a theologian, because that's one of our problems in seminary too, that our curriculum is so white, our syllabus is so white, and we gotta read people, other diverse voices, and hear them and bring them to the table. So I'm glad that you are learning from us, and it goes both ways. I think the dialogue is so important. That's why it's so great to not only read your book, but also have this wonderful discussion on my podcast, Madang. So thank you for that. There was another part in your book which I thought was really interesting, because the image that you gave me was just, I can't get rid of the image. And it's when you write about the Roman Empire saw Jesus as a threat to their violent regime. So they had him tortured and publicly executed as a matter of standard procedure by pinning a naked human being to wood, the way a dead butterfly or grasshopper is pinned in a display case. The empire showed its own absolute dominance and its victims' absolute defeat. I just, I can't get rid of that image anymore, because I think everyone who went to school in the Western world had those pinned grasshoppers and crickets, and it was just part of our elementary science classes. And to think, and you gave this clear image, wow, that was just, I can't get rid of it anymore. So did you want to say more about, because it is this violent empire and we as Christians have whitewashed it, made it, it wasn't bad, and we wear our crosses on our,
Oh,
no one would dare wear an electric chair on their neck,
yeah,
but we feel it's fine to have a cross on our neck or a
yeah.
crucifixion. So I don't know. I found it so powerful and I can't get rid of that image.
I mean, just again, I guess I'm mentioning names because I think the times are really dangerous. But just in the last few days, a YouTube video came out, or a little video clip came out of a member of Congress, Lauren Boebert, speaking to a Christian group saying Jesus didn't have enough AR-15s, so he couldn't defend himself from being killed by his government.
Oh my.
And when you see what she's doing there, she, in a sense, she's revealing how the cross was this, it was like an AR-15. It was a weapon of mass killing, and its intent was to pulverize people and turn them, to utterly dispatch with them. And when early Christians took the cross, it was as if to say, like, the power of the cross was that this is what Rome does. This is an exposure of the evil of Rome. Our leader, our Lord, our teacher was nonviolent. He showed more power enduring the cross than Rome showed inflicting the cross upon people. And then you just realize the Christian religion, starting with Constantine. I mean, the famous story about Constantine, wanting to put the cross on their shields. It's not a sign of nonviolence anymore. It's a sign of crushing, humiliating, vicious, hateful, arrogant, theocratic violence. And we see it resurging in the Christian faith.
Yeah.
No other religion has anything uglier than that going on than we Christians have in the world right now. And it is so socially acceptable, religiously acceptable. And that's why I think people like you and I, we have to talk about this. We have to get people facing it. Can I tell you just a quick anecdote about this?
Please.
Shortly after September 11th, 2001, I was at a gathering with some Muslim scholars, and I met this Muslim scholar. And I can't even remember why, but we had some need to exchange email addresses because she was going to send me something. And when she sent whatever it was she was sending me, she sent an email and she said, I'd never heard of you. I didn't know who you were. So I Googled your name and the word Muhammad, Muslim, Islam, because I wanted to find out what you had said about my religion and my prophet. And she said, when I looked across the internet, there is no record of you ever speaking ill of my religion and my prophet. And then she said something like, thank you so much for being a true Christian. And then she said, does anyone doubt that if smoke goes up smokestacks in the 21st century, it will not be Muslims who are being, killed, evoking that horrible image? And it's just this, and what it told me is that every time she met a Christian, her assumption was this was a person who is a threat to her existence, unless she could prove otherwise. And I understand why people feel that way. So anyhow, it's just this, to me, it's this message that if we're Christians, a huge part of our peacemaking work has to begin in our own faith community, urging people to take the message of peace.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, because I think that's so important. And even in your book, you do write, it was by 1748, John of Damascus had identified Muhammad as a false prophet. And so, that just, and, we have Islamophobia today, and, the 9/11 event, it just, awful of what Christians have done, and have moved away from the teachings of Jesus, who said, blessed are the peacemakers.
Yes.
It's mind blowing,
Yeah.
what has happened to Christianity. And so I think it's so important for us to recognize that. And earlier you mentioned about crusades, and you said, sometimes people think the crusades ended, but it's perhaps going on even today. And there is so much violence under the name of Christianity. And so I don't know what we are to do about all this violence that's happening. And you just mentioned the YouTube video too. So how are we to fight this violence of our Christian past and our present Christianity?
Well, I think you're doing it by being a scholar and a writer and a preacher and a podcaster, and I'm trying to do the same, although I'm not a professional scholar as you are. So I just think we all have to say it's our work. It's our work, and it's not that, and it has to do, I mean, if we'd been born 400 years ago, we wouldn't have had climate change as a front burner issue. But when you're born in the time we were born, climate change is a front burner issue. And being born when we're born and having a Christian identity means these issues are issues that come with the territory. So, and if people find that a shock, it's just a sign of how well brainwashed they have been.
Yeah, and I think it's also the rebranding of these things, because in your book you said the crusade ended around 1300, but we would say it lasts another 500, or it's ongoing.
Yes.
Under the alias, and you named it so correctly, you said European Christian colonialism, and I think that is exactly truth. Christianity, or I would say white Christianity, keeps rebranding and renaming these old events that they have been engaged in. And when you talk about Doctrine of Discovery in your book, you also said it's better called the doctrine of white Christian supremacy. When I saw that, I was like, wow, I think you hit it right on. This Doctrine of Discovery, which you called better known as the doctrine of white Christian supremacy, I think that is exactly what it was. So thank you for naming it that way.
When I look at my upbringing, my parents were extraordinary because for various reasons, they believed and practiced racial equation, but they were exceptions really.
That is an exception.
Especially, I was born in the 1950s. So, but the thing I realize now is that it would be, although it's becoming sadly easier, but there are millions of people who would never, ever call themselves white supremacists, but they would be proud to say they're Christian supremacists. And what ends up happening is white supremacy sneaks in through their Christian supremacy. And of course, they would quote a Bible verse. They could quote Bible verses that would, that they could defend Christian supremacy. But isn't it interesting? Jesus himself said, the lords of the Gentiles pretend they're benefactors when they lord it over people. And then he says, but I don't play that game. He says, I'm among you as one who serves. So he contrasts himself with supremacy and domination. It's the very opposite of what he's about. And then even Paul in Philippians 2, when he celebrates in one of the two probably most powerful Christological passages in the New Testament, he celebrates Jesus for downward mobility, for not grasping at supremacy, but for wanting to be a servant. I mean, where we get this idea that Christian supremacy is acceptable. And, and as you know, this then infects other cultures. So for example, a dear Korean friend of mine went as a short-term missionary to Mongolia some years ago. And there he met Korean Christians who were bringing the same kind of cultural imposition on Mongolians as white people had brought to Koreans. And I was stuck in an airport in Nairobi, Kenya for like 12 hours or something. And on the wall is a television playing televangelists from across Africa. And I was watching it happen. A Nigerian preacher is saying, the Lord has revealed to us that Africa has been given to Nigeria. And so he was justifying Nigerians having supremacy over the rest of Africa in the name of Christ. So it's the same.
Yeah.
I mean, to do this in the name of someone who said, I'm among you as one who serves.
Yeah. It's mind-boggling. And I just, it's hard for me to see that. And what white missionaries, when they came to Asia, they taught us this white Christianity, and that is upheld and practiced today. And me as an immigrant, when I point stuff out, this may be wrong, and then I get blamed for a lot of things, or named as being non-Christian, and that happens all the time. So I think what white missionaries instilled in us was told as the truth, and we have to profess whatever white missionaries told us, and whatever they said about how horrible our heritage, our culture, our religion was, we accepted that too. So it is this bad cycle, and then the Korean missionaries then go out to other places, like you have said, and just perpetuate the same message of whiteness and white supremacy, etc. And so also in your book, you say, the death toll, that was astounding to me, of the colonization project from 1493 to 1892. One researcher estimates 50 million were killed in the 20th century alone. That, in the name of Christianity, we go out and murder and kill and overtake and colonize. What are we supposed to do with all this data, and how do we even move forward?
Yeah. Well, of course, what a lot of people do is they say, well, I want nothing to do with Christianity. They see it as the sort of spiritual camouflage for this kind of violence. And I try to take that concern very, very seriously. And as you know, in the second third of the book, the middle section of the book, I talk about what our options are, and what are the consequences of saying we're going to leave? What are the consequences? What are different ways that we can stay? But I think one of the things that happened to me, Grace, and I can just speak of this sort of by way of honest personal testimony, is that you face this in Christianity, and then you realize that it's present elsewhere too. So the Soviet Union, establishes a atheistic state, and incredible atrocities are perpetuated there. And Pol Pot takes power in Cambodia, and horrible atrocities. And so then you start realizing, oh no, the problem isn't just Christianity. The problem is human beings. And when we face the human dimension of this, not to let Christianity off the hook, but to say, instead of Christianity being part of the problem, are there ways that some of us who are Christians can say, let's be part of the solution? And we'll do it in a different way, because we'll look for our Muslim and Jewish and Buddhist and Hindu and Sikh and other and agnostic and humanistic and other friends, and we'll say, how can we work together, on this human problem? Because when all we do is point, oh, it's those atheists, it's those Muslims, it's those Christians, in a certain sense, we aren't facing the depth of the human problem. So.
And I'm glad you steered it that way, because I don't want to say your whole book is all just negativity. There are these positive ways, and you do ask the question, is there a space for a Christian like me within Christianity. And I think, you began the podcast interview by saying many Christianities, and maybe that is a way there's enough room for us who think differently and practice differently. And also in your previous book, This Great Spiritual Migration, you do say, Christian faith is not an evacuation plan to heaven, but a transformation plan for the earth. And I think that is so key to, am I going to stay as a Christian? Do I remain in the faith? Because I think it needs to be transformative, that we do change. And climate change is one of the biggest issues of our time. What are we going to do about climate change and mass incarceration, racial injustice? And you also talk about patriarchy too, which I was glad to that you did. So all these patriarchal issues, sexism, these are big issues. And I think you're continuing on this conversation from all your previous books, that if we remain, this is what we need to do. So I'm so grateful for, it's not all just the negative things that I was talking about, but I was glad that you mentioned it as a white man. But there is all these other positive things. So thank you for all that material. So any kind of last words of wisdom that you want to share? I wish we had all day to do this, but I know you're busy. So any kind of last words, especially for those who are wondering, do I remain in the faith? For me, it was always, do I remain in the church? Because I always felt the church was so negative. But I always knew that there was something good about Christianity, even in the midst of all that trouble.
Yes.
So for those who are struggling.
Yes.
Yeah. Any?
Well, maybe one thing I could say, Grace, that is, very relevant to our conversation right now. I was a pastor for 24 years. And since then I've been, working mostly with clergy. And I've spent my life trying to help Christianity be renewed, or, however you want to say it. But I don't know, in the last 10 years, I think it finally, a sentence bubbled up in me. And here is the sentence. If our churches could be full and vibrant and alive and never deal with the issue of race, would I be happy? Yeah. And I thought to myself, the world would be a worse place if there is a vibrant racist Christianity still alive and well on the earth. And so what that helped me realize is the only future for Christianity that strikes me as a good one is, and by the way, the same would go for patriarchy. Yeah. The only future for Christian faith that is remotely redemptive, in my honest feeling, is a future where women and men are equal partners, and where, and if anything, where women are given the first and last word, because men have botched things up so badly for so long. And I think there's all kinds of things we could say about that. And where white people are just lose all of that supremacy, and where we rediscover one another as honored and respected and beloved peers, and where our differences are causes for curiosity and interest and respect and mutual collaboration with different gifts and skills. That's a future that I think is desirable. And I'm just honored to be working alongside you for that kind of a future.
Oh, that is, you said you're not you haven't been in the church as a minister, but anyway, that sounded so much like a sermon. So thank you for sharing that. I think there is still hope within Christianity. Yes. And as you mentioned before, it's the people that are the problem. If we just look at the message of Jesus, and I know you deal with dualism, and I'm so glad that you are breaking down dualistic ways of thinking, because I think that is a huge problem within Christianity. So if we deal with these negative things and the people that are the problem, if we go to the message of Jesus, and I think, there is hope, because we do, as you mentioned in your previous books, we need to live in this transformative lives, and whatever religion that we may have been born into or are part of, I think there is this aspect that always kind of tells us to move and do good and change the bad parts of society. And I hope that Christianity itself, the problems that you named in your book, we will be able to move beyond it and recognize it and remember it,
Yes.
but change our ways. I think that is so important for the future of Christianity and for our kids and the grandkids that are going to come after us.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Brian, for writing the book first and for naming the problems, because for me, that was like, way to go, Brian. We need you to say it clear. So I'm just grateful, and I'll be using your book. I am going to, it's already part of my other ongoing work. So thank you so much for writing it. Before we end, are you writing or on a new book? Working on a new book?
So I have to give my brain a little bit of a rest, but but after the new year, I'm going to start on a book that is tentatively entitled Life After Doom. And I want to talk about what does it mean to live in a world where things in all likelihood are going to get worse before they get better.
Okay.
And how do we do that without succumbing to despair or denial? Yeah.
Oh, actually, that'll be a very good book to follow up with this one. So those who decide to stay within Christianity can read your next book. And those who left, maybe they may come back after your next book. We are a dying breed. So we must recognize that we are a dying breed. People aren't going to church or turning to Christianity for anything, but you are a hope for us. So thank you so much, Brian, for you writing all these books and speaking and working at the Center for Action and Contemplation. Thank you so much. I wish we had the whole day to speak, but thank you so much for your time and for coming on Madang to share. And when your new book comes out after you take a long deserved break, please do come back.
Okay, thank you so much, and keep up the great work, Grace.
Oh, thank you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Please join over 3,000 people on Homebrewed Christianity's online class, Do I Stay Christian? This is an online pop-up learning community with Brian McLaren and Trip Fuller. This is a 4-week exploration of staying Christian, a guide for the doubters, the disappointed, and the disillusioned. Please follow Homebrewed Christianity as Dr. Fuller has other amazing weekly podcasts. Join him as he celebrates 14 amazing years of podcasting and has become the most listened to theological podcast in the world. Rooted in the Christian Quaker tradition of contemplation that inspires action, ESR prepares theologically diverse students for a pluralistic world. ESR offers many graduate programs such as Master of Divinity, Master of Arts in Peace and Social Transformation, Master of Arts in Religion, Master of Arts in Theopoetics and Writing. ESR also offers postgraduate certificates such as Bivocational Ministry Certificate, Entrepreneurial Ministry Certificate, and Writing as Ministry Certificate. Furthermore, ESR offers scholarship funds that do not have to be paid back, such as the Cooper Scholar Program and Starrett Scholar Program. Please check ESR website at www.esr.earlham.edu for all degrees, certificates, and scholarships. Join me at the Writing for Your Life online conference, How to Write Dangerously, September 12th through 16, along with an outstanding group of speakers, including John Palovitz, Lisa Sharon Harper, Brian McLaren, Frank Thomas, Robin Henderson Espinoza, Amy Julia Becker, and many more. Go to writingforyourlife.com to learn more.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com.